image file formats for saving, for sharing, for photography. So first of all, I just kind of wanted to talk to you about what's happening. And some of you've heard me talk about this when we've been photo editing, and I talk about information when we look at the graphs. Information or data is essentially being captured when you take a digital photo. So all this information being captured, there's different file formats, which can be retrieved and edited if you want to use the photo software. So there are more than what I'm listing here. And if we have time, I was even thinking I can go into Photoshop and even show you the big list of file types in Photoshop. It's massive. And there's some that I don't even know what they are, or why would you even need this? That I would have to research to those as well. But these are the most commonly used ones and ones that you'll probably come across. So of course you have JPEG. And just for your reference, this could be written JPEG or just JPG. And I was curious, is there a difference between that? And there's really not. It just used to be older computers only had room for 3 letters in the extension. So they made it JPG, whereas now they're able to have it JPEG. So I think that helps people understand how to say it better, because when you say JPG, not many people might know we say JPEG, but it's a Joint Photographic Experts Group is what JPEG stands for. You have TIFF. A TIFF file stands for Tagged Image File Format. You have RAW, which is just RAW. It doesn't stand for anything, it's just RAW. A DNG, a digital negative format, and this is a relatively newer-ish format compared to some of the other ones on this list. PNG, portable network graphics. If any of you have a Mac and you take a screenshot, you may notice the screenshots are always saved as PNGs. I don't know if you have noticed that, but it's true. They're saved as PNGs. So I've had to a couple times change my PNGs to JPEGs when it would allow me to upload a PNG. GIF or GIF. I honestly have heard people say it both ways and I'm conflicted. So I don't know if you've got a team that you're on. GIF, to me, I always think about peanut butter. And so like GIF, I always said GIF, but nah, tomato, tomato to me. You won't get in trouble with me if you pronounce it either way. And that's graphics interchange format. BMP stands for bitmap. And then PSD is a Photoshop document. So these are the primary ones that you're going to come across. If you are an iPhone user, you may have noticed, and I need to dig into this a little bit, iPhone has a new extension. It's like HEIC, and it drives me crazy. It's awful. It's awful. And I'm always having to change it into JPEGs. So I need to look into more of that. And if any of you've had that issue, you can let me know. And if you haven't, then blessings to you, because I sure have had some issues with that file format. So before we get started, I wanted to explain to you what image compression is, because we're going to talk about it with these file types. Because basically, saving something is sort of the act of compressing it in a sense. And what image compression means is it's minimizing the size of bytes. And if you're like, well, what the heck is a byte? A byte is just basically a unit of memory size. It's how they measure how much memory, just like, a pound is a weight of measurement, of weight, that sort of thing. So basically, as you're compressing and saving this, you need to preserve the image quality as much as possible without making it a massive file size. So that's why there's these different types of files, because they serve different purposes. So we'll kind of talk about these different files, like pros, cons, what it is, when you might want to use one, and all that good stuff. So starting with JPEG, because of course JPEG is the most common one. And we talked a little bit about in the last class, if you were there, JPEG versus RAW. And I actually later in this slideshow, I have an article that I linked for you talking about JPEG versus RAW more in depth, because there's a lot of conversations surrounding which one should I use. But JPEG, of course, is probably the most well-known file format. Most pictures are JPEGs. Most, when you have to upload your Facebook profile picture, your LinkedIn profile picture, all that, they'll say upload a JPEG. But basically what you need to know about a JPEG is they're compressed quickly. And the reason that they're compressed quickly is because the whole idea of a digital camera is beautiful, because we're not limited by a rule of film anymore, right? Where we have, 24 exposures or whatever. We can take many, as much as we can fill up a memory card, at least, depending on our memory card size. So the idea of a JPEG is you can store lots of images. And you've probably noticed, depending on your camera type, is if you set it to JPEG, you could have a low quality, medium quality, high quality, best quality. And basically what that is, it's the level of compression. So if you have a low quality, high compression JPEG, it's going to be smaller file size, so you can fit more on your memory card, but that means you're going to have less quality. When would you maybe notice that quality? If you try to blow up the pictures, zoom in on it, print it on your printer, send it to, Target or Walmart or wherever the photo center, get it printed there. That's when you're going to notice it. You might not notice it on the screen so much. So that's kind of the different levels of JPEG. Typically, I actually shoot in JPEG a lot, and I'll get to when you'd want to shoot RAW when I start talking about RAW, but high level JPEG is honestly what I use a lot. So when should you use a JPEG? I personally think like when it's for personal use, which I know a lot of us take photos for ourselves, that's kind of what we've talked about. But if you're gonna do, take a photo for something, wedding photos, senior photos, portraits of someone, you might want to consider something besides JPEG, which I'll get to in a minute. But if you're just doing personal use, social media, putting it in an album, making a Shutterfly book, that sort of thing, but not like big wall prints, probably like bigger than, I'd say 11 by 14 is maybe the largest I've printed with a really high quality JPEG, but otherwise, smaller pictures, your 5 by 7s, your 4 by 6s, again, those little Shutterfly books work really good with JPEG photos. Typically email, most of the time your JPEGs will go through email. I have more recently some of my high quality JPEGs. They're pretty big files actually still. So sometimes I'll have to do a smaller JPEG for sharing on the internet versus one that I'm printing. So sometimes I actually will save the same picture in multiple different file types depending on what I need to use it for. So again, just FYI to reiterate, a small file size just means more can be stored on your memory card. Quicker file transfer times to your computer, like from your camera to your computer, because they're smaller files. And remember, because of the compression, you lose some quality. Some of the quality lost in a high quality JPEG is not even like noticeable. I'll just put it that way. Like you can't even tell. TIFF file. This file you'll probably not use, but I think it's good to know about because I have had it come up where it wouldn't let me save it as a JPEG before, and I had to choose a TIFF file. So you may not run into this file type, or you might. It's more of an industry-like file format that you're gonna see more with like print industry, publishing, that sort of thing. So the TIFF typically is gonna be uncompressed. So even if you need to turn it in as a JPEG, starting with a TIFF file will allow you to do some more extensive post processing. So again, it's probably you're not going to really use this file type. Like I said, you see it more in like industry world, but that's kind of what it is. So kind of pros and cons of a TIFF file. Again, you can manipulate photos extensively because they're not compressed to the degree of a JPEG. Option to print like quality, really high quality, big size prints, like big printed posters. You know, imagine like festival posters or things for, you know, musical concerts or things like that that are really large with a lot of information, text in addition to photographs. TIFF files, one reason that they're so popular in the industry is they can be saved in a variety of color formats and in the various forms of compression. So it just makes it really versatile for the industry. And of course, much bigger file sizes, you need big storage, longer transfer and loading times due to the big file sizes.
So Jennifer, what's
Yeah,
TIFF versus RAW?
good question. So I'm gonna get into RAW now, and we'll kind of talk about that. But primarily, what I kind of notice is TIFF just seems like more of what industry uses, and RAW seems to be more of what like the professional photographer industry uses versus like publishing, print, that sort of industry where they're like printing and that's what they do versus photographers who are doing a lot of photo manipulation and editing, if that makes sense.
Okay, so what is the difference in the information in each file then?
You know, I would have to dig into that a little bit more because from my understanding is they're both uncompressed. Neither
Okay.
of them are compressed, which the raw, which again is what I'll get into now. The whole idea with the raw is it's your camera basically has no influence over like the photo
Hmm.
other than your settings that you're choosing, but every single setting that you choose can be altered after the fact with photo editing software with a raw image in ways that you cannot edit a JPEG. So as far as the TIFF, I'm actually I'll do a little blog post. I'm going to look a little bit deeper into TIFF versus RAW because in all my findings, and again, TIFF files aren't something I've used unless I had no other option to save it. But again, my biggest thing is I'm just seeing is like industry versus the photographer. But I'm curious too, like you're saying, as far as the information. I'm
Okay.
wondering if the TIFF, like a JPEG, if the camera has any sort of impact on the actual file. That's what I'm wondering. So
Okay.
I'll look
Can
into that a
the
little
TIFF,
deeper.
okay. Can the TIFF
Mhm.
files be readily changed to JPEGs?
Yes, that is
Okay.
one of the advantages of a TIFF file is it's so easily interchangeable and with the color, the ways you can save the different color variations, which I'll get more into that when we start talking about color theory too.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah,
Can you give examples of what you can do in RAW that you can't do with a JPEG? Like you
yeah,
said, when you're
mhm,
editing,
yep,
can you give an example of what you can edit or not edit?
yes. So actually, like right here, um, so first of all, just backing up a minute, raw files retain all of the information originally captured. So when you're editing a JPEG, yes, you can essentially edit things like contrast. Yes, you can edit exposure. Yes, you can edit white balance, but you can't fine tune it so precisely as you can with RAW. Because RAW will like allow you to get into like every little bit of information that's in the photo without it being compressed, meaning you wouldn't have lost any of the quality. essentially. Whereas a JPEG, even a high quality JPEG straight from your camera, it will come out compressed. So you will have already lost information from a JPEG. Does that make sense?
You know, unless I saw it, it's kind of hard to visualize, you know, what you're saying on it.
Totally. And you know what we'll do? Here, I'm adding this to my list. We'll do editing a raw photo versus editing a JPEG. And what could be interesting, what I'll do is I'll take some similar photos of the same subject, and some will be raw and some will be JPEGs.
Yeah.
And what we'll do is we'll look, I can take some low quality JPEG, medium quality, high quality, etc. And we'll look, we'll get into Photoshop and we'll do some exploring. And we'll look specifically at what that looks like with the same subject, but the file types are different. And then we can kind of get our hands dirty a little bit. But I think to that article, which I'll get to in a minute, because there's a lot out there on RAW versus JPEG. There's so much. So the article I posted might help too.
Mm-hmm. So
again,
first sentence on the paragraph here, Jennifer says raw files are compressed. So it is a compressed file then.
Well, every file in that sense is compressed.
Okay.
Because like the file itself is compressed. But what I mean is like all the information from when you took the photograph in that moment stays true.
Okay.
Whereas a JPEG, it does not.
Okay. So as you're editing raw files, can you go back to original if you choose to?
Yes.
Okay, you can make that adjustment. Okay.
Yes. You can always go back and like get your information. It's always there as a raw file.
Mm-hmm.
But then a raw file, so some photographers will choose to edit their files in RAW because they can do more editing, more fine tuning because there's more information there. But then when they save their photos, then they might turn it into a JPEG.
Okay.
And why would they do that? One, they might do that because it's more shareable. RAW files are not made, they're not easily shared because they're big, huge files.
Mm-hmm.
I have taken some raw files before, and I just remember it took forever to get them off of my camera onto my computer. I mean, they are big files.
Mm-hmm.
Because of all that information there too. So, you know, there's times where you go back and forth, but truly, I think where the raw comes into play of where you're actually truly going to notice the difference is when you're doing some of those edits.
Mm-hmm.
Certain things you want to access in Photoshop, which a lot of those particular edits, I just don't feel like I need to do, I guess. So I don't go there. I don't know. Most of my editing is pretty minimal too, where there's a lot of photographers that do really big edits with lots and lots of layers and lots of photo manipulation. So I think it depends on what your purpose is too. You know, as I've shared with the group, you know, learning just on the SLR with film in the beginning, I really tried to learn my camera settings. So now when I take digital photos, I really focus on my camera settings while I'm taking the photo. Mm-hmm. So when I get to post-production, there's not a ton I usually need to do because I did a lot of what I wanted to do while I was taking the photo. Whereas I think there's a big world of fine art photography, even magazine, editorial, fashion, where they're doing a lot of heavy editing, right? I mean, so much more editing than we probably even realize is happening in the images that we see, right, on the internet and all of that. So I think some of that comes into play there is because they can do more than what maybe the average person would do or the hobbyist would do, you know, when they're editing.
So when you go to print it out somewhere,
Mhm.
let's say you go to a good Photoshop, can they print it in RAW, or do you have to still convert it to JPEG or something else? Yeah.
You would still convert it.
Okay.
Mhm. Yep. Which, you know, to be honest, is another reason I probably use high quality JPEG. And I mean, my JPEG files are big because I'm using, they're the highest quality I can save on Photoshop, and they come from the highest quality on my camera too.
Yeah.
So, I mean, they're really big, high quality photos. And I'll talk about the printing in a minute, but most places to print will require a JPEG.
Right. So Jennifer, when you've edited everything on your raw file, and you've come to a point where this is going to be published and converted to JPEG, won't the JPEG remember everything that was adjusted in raw and give you a pretty good quality JPEG?
I mean, yeah, your JPEG's still going to be good quality.
Good.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I
You
mean,
could probably do large prints from
yes.
that JPEG then.
Yes, you can. And this is not to be like, you know, poo-poo on JPEG. JPEGs are bad. Like, not at all. JPEGs are great files. Absolutely. In fact, I'll get to some of the other ones that you know, probably want to stay away from when you're doing some other things.
Okay.
But yeah, I think raw is just, it's like buzz in photography, to be honest. And like, I am by no means like a professional photographer. My photography experience comes from, it was my focus in college. So it was my emphasis in my art education degree. I took more photography classes than any other art classes at the time. I taught middle school and high school photography. And I've on my own shot some portraits, maternity photos, wedding photos, in addition to just like loving photography on my own. So I'd say like I'm a great deal self-taught as having some formal education. But I mean, when it comes to the technology aspect, I will tell you there's still some stuff that's like, ooh. Like, I get the idea of a bit, but then at the same time, I'm like, what? So totally. And just please know, like, all these questions you have are awesome. And anytime there's something I don't know, my mindset is like, let's figure it out and let's find out, because that's how we learn more things. So, you know, absolutely. And this might challenge me to experiment more with raw and the different types of editing you can do, because it is really in depth. But good questions. So just some kind of general FYIs. Again, the best quality image file is captured. Extensive options in post-processing and image manipulation. Time needed to convert and edit photos. You must edit your raw files. So again, a raw file, you can't like upload that anywhere. You can't like submit that someplace and have it printed like we talked about, or you want to update your profile picture, so you try to upload a raw file. You can't do that. That's not going to happen. So again, the purpose of your raw is so you have this high quality photo with all this information so that you can fine tune and edit it. So imagine, you know, a JPEG, you want to brighten it. So you lighten it maybe with your levels or your curves or the brightness bar, and the entire image brightens. Whereas a raw, because you have all this different information, you might be able to like fine tune adjust that, where you're brightening hair separately from trees, separately from clothes, separately from skin. You know what I mean? There's more fine tuning options available. So there's times that you're going to want to do that, and professional photographers do want to do that. They want to control every little detail. It's like, imagine like you're standing at a scene, you know, fall landscape like this, okay, and the image on the left, okay, it's kind of, you know, you get the sense of fall, but then the image on the right, when you push those colors, enhance those, you have all that opportunity to do that. So maybe that makes sense a little bit more too. But like I said, we'll dive in and I'll do a whole session and we'll just edit raw photos versus JPEGs. And we'll look at all the things that you can do.
One question again on the raw photos. You're actually able to transfer the raw file from your camera to your computer though readily? Okay, so that's where you do the editing then on computer. Okay.
Correct. So yes, with raw files though, you will need a program that will read raw. So Photoshop is going to, Lightroom is going to, Elements is going to. I would have to check on Pixlr. The only thing I would be cautious about is Pixlr is it's a web-based program and raw files are huge. So essentially it would be you uploading a raw file to the web-based program, which might not work so well. Okay. You might want something actually on your computer for raw just because it's so big. But if you had a really nice fast computer and good internet connection, you might not have any trouble. I just haven't tried it personally.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So there's an issue with capturing raw, and what that looks like is every camera, even from the same manufacturer, will often use different formats. So that means each camera will have its own raw file. And that could be a problem, but it might not be a problem. Like for you and I, probably not a problem, but for professional photographers, it was becoming a problem. So that's where the DNG file came to be. DNG is probably a file like TIFF that you're probably not going to use, but you might come across it. So Adobe did create this file type. And so basically it's kind of supposed to be like a standard raw file format across all of the manufacturers and different cameras. So it's supposed to be something to sort of streamline everything. And you can click on this right here to like learn more about this. The DNG is not a file type I've used a ton. I've come across it here and there, but it's probably not something you're going to use much, but I thought I would mention it in case you're come across it. If you're in Photoshop and you see it as an option, or you hear the term digital negative and you're wondering what that means. So it's sort of like a universal sort of raw file format, but you would have to like save it as something else, like a JPEG or something to do anything with it from there. So again, digital negative, the idea behind it, the DNG file, ability to use image processing software. Because it's Adobe, you can open it with like Lightroom, Photoshop. The idea, it's maybe a safer long-term option just because raw files again could be specific to camera types. So if you were looking to potentially change cameras and you put in an old SD card, you could maybe no longer read that file on your camera. Would that matter for most of us? Probably not. But for photographers, it could. So that's just what the DNG file format is.
Jennifer, about uploading, when you're working with your raw files and saving them, instead of going to your computer storage, can you go to an iCloud storage with them?
Yes, you can, absolutely.
And then the digital, it remembers all the original features of that raw file then. Well then, as time passes and you decide to open it up later on, will it update itself?
I think it should. I mean, it should, and you should be able to keep opening it on your computer.
Okay.
But what that would mean is, for example, this is one instance I could see it where a traditional RAW versus this would be the difference, would be if you changed cameras or you shot with multiple cameras and for some reason you wanted to bring that raw file into your other camera for some reason. With the SD card, you probably couldn't.
Okay.
But again, I say that with the thought that I don't know that any of us here would need to do that, but some professional photographers might. So again, this is why this is kind of a one I thought I'd bring up, because you might come across it, but it's, you know, it's probably one you're not going to need to use.
But good to know.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. This one, however, I think is good to know, is the PNG file. And PNG files I actually use often for things, especially on the internet, because they're small. They're smaller files. And the cool thing about them is you can save transparent backgrounds, unlike other file types. You cannot with JPEGs. JPEG, if you have like a clear background, meaning see-through, when you save that JPEG, it'll just like throw a white background on there, and you will have a box around it. So PNGs are, and I'll show you what I mean in just a minute too. But PNGs are really good for logos, especially. A lot of websites will use PNG files. So again, there's no background. You could have just like a little logo and just that shows up. It's almost like a sticker with nothing that shows through it. You can save your own PNGs fairly easily. A lot of programs will let you use it, but of course Photoshop you can. As I mentioned, when you take a screenshot, if you have a MacBook, it'll automatically save as a PNG file. So right here, this is what I mean. If you notice the man running with the checker background is clear, but it needs to show you something on the screen that it's clear. So obviously this isn't really saved as a PNG because I wanted you to see that transparent background. But let's say you wanted this little man on your website and your website background was red. This PNG file would allow this little man to appear like he was just on your red background with no border around it. And that PNG is the only file you can do that with. So if you're ever wanting something clear, see-through, you know it needs to be PNG. But you do have the lossless compression means it's a pretty good image quality. It's not compromised too much when you're editing it, but it's not really good for printing. Your image quality is gonna look pretty good like on the computer, but if you printed it, it wouldn't look so good. So PNG is really like a computer file. PNGs, your photos will look pretty decent if you save them as PNGs, but you can't make it too big, if that makes sense. And then our GIF or our GIF. Again, these are really this is a file for the internet. You would never save something as this file to print it. There would be no point. The whole idea behind this too is they don't get super big, but they're moving pictures, not like a movie. So it's not an MP4. You can't have sound with it, but it is a moving picture file. So it's basically like a stack of pictures that you can rotate through continually on a loop. And you can make them. They're pretty simple to make. But again, this would just be a file that you would have on the computer. You wouldn't need it for print. And actually, I'll just minimize this in the notes down here. Oops, here we go. I just did some different GIF examples on Google. Like this horse actually is like galloping. So if you want to play around with those moments.
When I first started out doing newsletters and things like that years ago, this is GIF is what you would always use,
Yes.
for an image. It wasn't necessarily animated, but it was an image that was small, more cartoonish.
Yeah.
It wasn't your photo style of image. It was just a simple drawing kind of
like a
fun
clip art.
Right, the clip art that you would throw into a newsletter and things like that. Yeah.
So I will say, like this image of this horse is a GIF file, but it's not moving right now because it's not in a platform that allows it to move. When you're just in Google search, you can see them moving though. So yeah, you can have it be still. They will display as still. You can also save something as a GIF file because you just want to put it on the web, but there's only one layer, so it's not a movie in that sense too. But I guess kind of like the PNG gives you the advantage of a clear background, transparent background. The advantage of a GIF is you can have it moving, or GIF. I'm using it interchangeably too. I swear, I hear people say it all these different ways all the time. And then the high schoolers, oh, they say it every which way too. So you don't know. But I will say this does not, you can't have partial transparency on here. It is very limited colors. Like it says here, it can contain animation, doesn't have to, but it can. And it is a pretty small file. It's a fairly small file. You can upload it to the web. You can email them. That's why we can send them in text messages because they're little. They're not super big. All right, the BMP file. This is one that you might come across in a photo, perhaps. This is typically, I feel like, a file I used to come across more than I do now. It's a Microsoft platform, like for Windows, but Macs have since picked up the capability to recognize them. But back when, you couldn't open these on a Mac. So it was a Windows thing. So a BMP it's a large file, and you get a high quality digital file, but it's not good, or sorry, it's good for print, not good for web. So it's the opposite of a PNG, where PNG is good for web, not good for print. This is one which was good for print. But again, I feel like it's maybe like an older file type that you might come across, but you're probably not going to use it. So I thought I'd mention it just in case you do come across it. A lot of BMPs I have had, I just end up changing to JPEGs because more people and places use JPEGs. So again, it can be used for printing images that are saved in high quality. It's a large file size. So again, it's something you may see, but it's probably not something you're gonna pick or choose. And then PSD, this is a big file. I'll start talking a lot about this when we get into photo editing, because eventually your files become PSDs. JPEGs become PSDs, RAWs become PSDs, a TIFF could become a PSD, a PNG could become a PSD if you're using layers. So this is when you would have, oops. Sorry, guys. Just had to let someone else in a minute. Cool. So we're going to talk more about layers when we get into Photoshop, but basically you can have layers of information when you're editing. Within the different layers, you can do all sorts of different things. So again, we'll get into that later. I won't talk too much about that now, but if you have layers, you can no longer save it as any other file but a PSD. Pixlr will open PSD files on the web, which is awesome. PSD files are pretty big files, but again, as it says here, you get really a lot of flexibility when you're retouching and fine-tuning with all these layers. So again, it's a Photoshop specific file. When you're ready to save it, you have to flatten your image together. So you have to push all your layers back down together, and then you're able to save it as a JPEG file to share it from there on out. Or you could really, I mean, I'm sure you could go back and save it as a RAW, but I'm not sure that you'd need to or want to, but depending on what you were trying to do. So again, you can see this image here. You've got all those layers. You can press it, you flatten it back down, and then you can save it as something else. So some more resources just that I thought were pretty good. I know there's a lot of stuff out there, so sometimes it's hard even curating articles and websites of what's good and what's not good. So this one right here from format.com on RAW versus JPEG, I thought was pretty good for if you want to look into more on the photographer, like professional photographer standpoint on RAW versus JPEG. And then if you're interested, LifeWire had a little bit on DNG files that I thought was interesting. So if you're curious about the DNG file and this kind of idea of a generalized RAW file and you're just curious about that, I thought this was an interesting article that I had found. So there's a couple other things we have to know about regarding file. So PPI and DPI, if you've ever heard of those terms. PPI stands for pixels per inch, and the resolution of a printed photo is measured in DPI, or dots per inch. Okay, so PPI is when you're looking, it sounds funny when you say that, but PPI is looking on the computer screen. DPI is printed. Okay, so those are the two differences there. So pixels are on your computer screen, pixels per inch, dots per inch are what's been printed. Okay, so the DPI is the dots of ink the printer prints per line per inch. Therefore, the higher the DPI, as you can imagine, the more detail is in the printed image. However, if a photo is printed with high DPI, the detail represented in the photo can only be as high as the PPI, which if you think about it, makes sense. Why could the DPI that you print be higher than what's on your computer that you're printing from? So we have to think about what your PPI needs to be before we print. There's basically two numbers you need to know, and I would have them etched in your memory. I have these two numbers memorized. Is 72 and 300. So 72 is your web PPI pixels. 300 is your print. So and this bird image, I will just tell you, when it says 72 and 300 like this, you actually can't see the difference on your computer screen. Okay, it's dramatized for you to get this idea that when we print we need higher DPI. So sorry, I'm saying it backwards, I'm getting my words mixed up. We need the higher PPI, and this says DPI for, this is, okay, here we go. 300 if you print is going to look like this. 72 if you print is going to look like this. But 72 would still look like 300 on the computer screen. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I know with the PPI and the DPI, I got myself mixed up there. But that's kind of why it's like shown like that. So if you have a 72 resolution and you attempt to print it, it's going to look pixely. But if you have a 300 print, it's going to look good. But 72 and 300 on the computer screen are going to look the same. So why does it matter? 300, if all your resolution is 300 on all these pictures you're posting on websites and Facebook and all this, it's going to take forever to load for people's computers. So imagine you go to a website, you're shopping, you're looking at all the dresses on Kohl's, or, you know, scrolling through images on the computer screen. If those were all 300 PPI, your computer would, it would like overheat because it'd take forever for that to load. So that's the difference. Now, a lot of times I'll go back and say, like, I know Facebook, they do things to their photos when you put them on there anyway. So Facebook is sort of a different world. But let's say you have a website or a blog where you're posting pictures. That's when it would come into play, is the 300 versus the 72. So any questions on that? Hopefully I didn't confuse you too much with the PPI and the DPI.
I was just going to say too, I used to do a lot of putting things in the newspaper. Yeah. And they would tell me that in order to put it in the newspaper, your pictures, your photos had to have at least 200 PPI, because that means they could enlarge it to the point, whatever they wanted in their newspaper. They had to have at least 200. So you don't want to just send something off your phone or things like that, because typically they will not be that. Same as when I
Correct.
entered a photo contest, they did the same thing. They said, we need to have this amount of PPI. You know, if you're going to have your photo actually printed off for us to put out, if you don't, then the rest will just go on this digital slideshow.
Yes.
And, you know, kind of thing.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what that means. I will tell you though, let's say you take a photo that's 72. You can put it into Photoshop and change it to 300. Because sometimes it's not going to look quite the same, but you can do some adjusting and you can do a few little tricks. It's not the same, but you can change it. Because I will tell you, there's been a couple times I've gotten away with a phone photo when I put it on the computer in Photoshop. The resolution was 72 straight from my phone. And I changed it to 300. I did my edits and I printed it, and it printed really well. So I will tell you, you can be sneaky, but it's not foolproof. So don't just like go thinking you can always do that, but sometimes you can get away if it's a good photo. And I didn't print it massive either. I mean, 300 DPI, like my high school students in the graphic design program, they'll do their own. We have a massive printer. The thing's huge, it's bigger than my desk is. And we can print on canvas, watercolor paper, photo paper, like you name it. And they're printing these massive, huge posters, huge wall size, decals, all sorts of things. And it's all 300 DPI or 300 PPI, sorry. So, I mean, 300, you can print massive with that. If you have 72 resolution and you're trying to do like a little 5x7 print on your home printer, it's probably gonna be fine. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're doing a reference photo for drawing or painting, I'm not saying like a nice photograph, but there's some things I'll leave 72 if I'm just printing on my printer paper. It's a reference photo. I don't worry too much about it. But otherwise 300 is just my standard. I just always make sure it is. But when we get into editing in Photoshop, I'll kind of show you where to find that information so you can like check a certain photo and see what the resolution is. You can see what it is right in there.
So Jennifer, can anyone come over and get their prints large scale?
Yeah, right. Come on,
really?
Come on over to Colorado.
What a deal.
Right? No, we did this Make-A-Wish. We had a Make-A-Wish kiddo, and we did this huge mural of him, a portrait of him, and then we printed it on canvas and stretched it to give to like his family. And the printer, I mean, it's an Epson printer. It's and we have 2 Epsons. We call it Big Mama, and then there's Little Mama, I think. But yeah, it's once we get back in there, I'll have to take some videos of that printer going to town. It's a workhorse.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. We have Colorado has a pretty neat relationship. It's called Colorado Technical Education. So it's outside of our school district, but they help with funding for a lot of the industry level jobs. So like students are using the equipment they would use at the industry level, printers, computers, all the software. So they're like ready when the time comes to get an internship or get a job or that sort of thing.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What's about the average time a mural is printed? Like a 4 by 8 foot. A couple days.
No, it doesn't take a couple days. It takes a couple hours.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it probably print within a couple hours. Yeah, it kind of depends. But our graphic design instructor he's phenomenal. He's got those kids making stickers with little cut lines, and the printer sucks back in the thing and cuts around each individual sticker, any shape.
Oh, wow.
Custom. You can make it custom. It's pretty incredible.
Advanced.
Yeah. So yeah, I'll have to do, when we get back into the room, I'll have to do like a little tour and show you guys some of the fun things that we can do on those machines.
Great, thanks.
Yeah. Here's another one just to show you. A little pug. Little tug. Again, the 300 versus the 72. Again, you're not really going to notice it on the screen, but the print is when you would notice that. And I will actually, my recommendation